Welcome, listeners, to the very first episode of Real Talk, Grimm Edition. I'm thrilled you've joined me as we embark on this new journey into the shadows of storytelling, a place where timeless tales meet the mysterious, the unsettling, and sometimes the downright grim. My name is Josh, and if you're a fan of my other shows in the Real Talk family, you already know one thing about me. I have an unshakable love for all things dark, mysterious, and just a little offbeat. From dissecting cinematic worlds to deep dives into chilling, campy, and downright terrifying corners of the horror genre, I've always been drawn to stories that challenge the light and embrace the shadows. But if you're new here, let me tell you a bit about where this passion comes from. Growing up, I was that kid who couldn't just read a book or watch a movie. I wanted to crawl inside the story, explore the cracks, and see what lay beneath. I wasn't just interested in the shiny, feel-good tales where everything wraps up with a bow. No, I wanted the stories with a bite, where the characters face something raw, uncomfortable, or downright frightening. The kind of stories that made you think long after they ended. That fascination has only grown stronger over the years, and honestly, has shaped a lot of who I am today. Now, where does this obsession with the dark and macabre come from? That's something I've always tried to figure out myself. Maybe it was growing up with the scholastic book fairs and reading stories like Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, or stealing my mom's Dean Koontz and Stephen King books and reading those from a very young age. It's just stories that always had just enough truth in them to make you glance over your shoulder later really got to me. Or maybe it was the first time I realized that behind every happy ending in a fairy tale, there's usually a darker version hiding in the shadows. I mean, think about it. These are the stories originally designed to warn, to teach, even to terrify. There's something deeply human about that. We tell these tales to confront our fears, to understand danger, and to make sense of a world that isn't always kind. I think what's always resonated with me is the way these darker stories linger. They leave an imprint. A happy story might entertain you for an afternoon, but a grim, cautionary tale, that stays with you. You'll find yourself mulling over its meaning, replaying its moments, maybe even seeing a bit of yourself in its characters or its lessons. And isn't that the whole point of storytelling? To reflect, to challenge, to dig a little bit deeper into the human experience. It's this love for the eerie, the strange, and the thought-provoking that has now drawn me to Grimm fairy tales. These are some of the oldest and most enduring stories we have. They're filled with danger, wonder, and just enough darkness to make them timeless. They're not just stories for children. They're stories for anyone who's ever wrestled with life's complexities or stared off into the unknown. And that's why I'm here, because I think there's something really special about peeling back the layers of these tales and asking, what's really going on here? What's the lesson? What does this story say about us as people? So if you're like me and love exploring the darker corners of storytelling, I think you're going to feel right at home here. Grimm's fairy tales are the perfect mix of enchanting and unsettling. Just the kind of thing to leave you thinking long after the story has stopped being told. Now, before we dive into what this show is all about, let me take a moment to share a bit about my credentials. As I mentioned, my fascination with stories started early. I was the kid who stayed up way too late, flipping through old books or sneaking horror movies when I was definitely too young to be watching them. But it wasn't just the scares that hooked me. It was the way these tales pulled you into another world, made you feel something, and left you thinking about it. That love for storytelling shaped a lot of my life. I studied creative writing and English literature in college, where I got to dissect not only what makes a story great, but what gives a great story staying power. What makes it stick in your mind like a melody you can't shake. Over time, I found that my passion wasn't just in reading or watching these stories, but in sharing them, talking about them, and exploring the layers that make them tick. That's exactly how I ended up launching my first podcast, Real Talk. On that show, I dig into films in general, reviewing anything and everything, sometimes random movies that I've watched. Sometimes we go into a director and watch their films chronologically, like we did with Tim Burton and Wes Anderson. But let me tell you, that's been such a fun journey. It's like revisiting an old friend who happens to live in a Gothic mansion, because films have an uncanny way of blending all the things we love. And then I get to talk about it. But I couldn't stop there. The darker side of my storytelling love led to Real Talk Horror Edition. And that show lets me dive deep into the world of horror films. From campy cult classics that are gloriously over the top, to the kind of psychological horror that gets under your skin and keeps you looking over your shoulder. It's been an incredible ride exploring what makes horror so much more than jump scares. Both of those podcasts have been my creative outlets, but they're also a reflection of my love for storytelling in its many forms. And now, with Grimm Edition, I'm taking that passion in an entirely new direction, because Grimm fairy tales are some of the oldest, darkest stories we still tell today, and I couldn't be more excited to explore them with all of you. So now you know, I've always been fascinated by stories. The kind that stick with you, the kind you remember, and the kind you think about. But there's something about Grimm's fairy tales that has always stood out to me. They're not just simple bedtime stories. They're some of the earliest examples of storytelling that dive deep into the human experience. They've got it all: danger, heartbreak, redemption, and of course, a good healthy dose of the macabre. And it's fascinating how these tales work on so many levels. As a kid, you're enchanted by the magic and the adventure. But as an adult, you start to see the darker layers, the warnings, the hidden truths, and the moral questions. They resonate with all of us in different ways. Whether it's the raw fear of the unknown or the triumph of outsmarting evil, these stories remind us of the power of storytelling and how it shapes who we are, whether we realize it or not. And that's why I wanted to create this show. With Real Talk Grimm Edition, I wanted to go back to these tales that have been passed down for centuries, stories that feel like they were whispered around a fire on a cold, dark night. I want to honor their timelessness, but also peel back the layers to uncover the deeper meanings that are still so relevant today. For me, this is about rediscovery, Sure, many of us know the Disneyfied versions of these tales, but the original Grimm stories, they're raw, they're unsettling, and they're unapologetically human. And that's where the magic lies. The mix of wonder and unease that feels so timeless, so universal. So with this show, we're not just revisiting these stories, we're exploring them. We'll uncover their themes, pick apart their moral lessons, and maybe even see how they connect to our modern world. Because these aren't just fairy tales. They're a mirror showing us the best and worst of humanity, all wrapped up in a story that will still captivate you today. Now I want to talk about how this show is going to work and what you can expect as we dive into these timeless tales. First, let me paint you a picture. Imagine sitting by a fire, or maybe curled up in a cozy chair on a rainy evening, with a book of Grimm's fairy tales in your lap. Now, these aren't the watered-down, happily ever after versions you might know. These stories are raw, eerie, and often unsettling, with layers of meaning that go far beyond what's on the surface. And that's what we'll be exploring here. Each story will begin with a storytelling episode, with me, your guide, narrating these tales just as they were meant to be heard, spoken aloud, as if passed down through generations. Some of these stories are quick, sharp little lessons that can fit neatly into a single episode. Others, though, are sprawling epics that demand more time to unravel, so they may stretch across 2, maybe even 3 episodes. But don't worry, I promise to leave you with just the right amount of suspense to keep you coming back for more. Then, once the story is told, we're not done. That's where the discussion episode comes in. These are the episodes where we'll sit back and ask the big questions. What was this story really about? Why has it endured for centuries? What does it say about humanity, morality, or even the culture in which it was created? Together, we'll unpack the layers, the obvious lessons, the hidden messages, and yes, even the darker or uncomfortable truths that make these tales so fascinating. Here's an example. You might remember the story of Hansel and Gretel. On the surface, it's about 2 kids surviving against all odds. But dig a little deeper, and you'll see themes of abandonment, hunger, survival, and even justice in its most primal form. That's what I want us to explore. Not just the entertainment value of these hidden stories, but the rich, often unsettling truths lurking just below the surface. And I think that's what makes Grimm's fairy tales so extraordinary. They strike this delicate balance between being entertaining and unnerving, between being timeless and deeply tied to the era they came from. They're fun and haunting in equal measure, and that's why they endure. My goal is for you to walk away from every episode with a new perspective, whether that's a deeper appreciation for the storytelling, or a new understanding of the morals and themes these tales carry. So if you're ready to journey with me into the woods, where the shadows are deep and the lessons are waiting, let's get started. Before we wrap up this introductory episode, let me just say how genuinely thrilled I am to embark on this journey with you. Grimm's fairy tales have always held that special place in my heart, not just as stories, but as glimpses into the human experience, layered with artistry, shrouded in mystery, and packed with lessons that still resonate centuries later. And now, we get to rediscover them together, piece by piece. Think about it. These tales have been whispered around fires, passed down through generations, and retold countless times. Yet, they still hold the power to surprise us, challenge us, and make us think. Maybe they'll even make you reflect on your own life in ways you weren't expecting. Because that's the magic of these stories. And that's what Real Talk Grimm Edition is all about. Making these old, timeless tales and exploring why they still matter. So this is how it's going to work. Mark your calendars for Monday, March 3rd, when I'll release the very first storytelling episode. I can't wait to dive into this first tale, unravel its twists and turns, and then in the episodes that follow, peel back the layers to explore the meanings and morals tucked away in its depths. So whether you're a longtime fan of Grimm fairy tales or you're hearing them for the first time, I promise this will be a journey worth taking. In the meantime, make sure to subscribe to the show so you don't miss a single episode. And hey, if you like what you hear or you're as excited as I am, leave a review and let me know your thoughts. Reviews and ratings really help spread the word, and I'd love to hear what you're hoping to discover in these stories. Lastly, you can follow me on social media for updates and sneak peeks into what's coming next. Trust me, you won't want to miss out what's in store. You can find me on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at Real Talk, occasionally on X at Real Talk Pod, or just email me, therealtalk@gmail.com. And thank you for joining me today, and we'll talk to you on March 3rd, where we'll open the book together and take that first step into the dark, enchanting world of Grimm's fairy tales. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Real Talk Grimm Edition. I am truly so excited to have you join me on this journey into the mysterious, magical, macabre world of Grimm's fairy tales. And I'll leave you with this. This is Real Talk Grimm Edition, where the timeless meets the twisted, and every tale has a lesson to uncover. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you.